Most respected Khenpo Sodargye, distinguished guests, friends, teachers, and students, good morning. It is a pleasure to see you all. I am Du Hanfeng from the Institute of Religious Studies and Cultural Communication at the Communication University of China. First, let me just share with you a few lines from a song. The majestic and towering snow mountains are where I practice. The vast and boundless mundane world is the hometown I have left behind. My ever-compassionate teacher is my eternal refuge. The profound and secret oral instructions are my treasures through all lifetimes. Seda, covered in blooming flowers, is my sacred place of practice. The snowlands where cattle and sheep thrive are where I study the esoteric teachings. The title or the name of this particular song is actually the Song of Practice. The lyrics were written by Khenpo Sodargye. Khenpo is from Luhu, Ganzi, Sichuan, and was born in 1962. 2015 was the year marking his 30th year since ordination as a great Khenpo of Larong Gar Buddhist Academy in Sichuan. For 30 years, Khenpo has spread the Dharma and benefited sentient beings, skillfully guiding and teaching with abundant achievements. The three great treasuries, treasury of exoteric and esoteric teachings, treasury of sublime Dharma, treasury of wisdom and compassion. Khenpo's footsteps have reached across the world, and his Dharma teachings resound everywhere. As everyone knows, Tibetan culture began to spread eastward starting from the 11th century. It reached a peak in the 13th century and entered the 21st century. Tibetan Buddhist culture, as the carrier of Tibetan culture, has brought great honor to the Chinese nation. In response to the needs of the times, it has sought new ways and new channels for dissemination. It continues to influence and transform the course of human thought and the culture. This demonstrates the great vitality of Tibetan Buddhist culture, and Khenpo Sodargye is an outstanding representative who actively promotes the inheritance and development of both Han and Tibetan traditional cultures. He has initiated and organized multiple world youth Buddhist symposiums, launched the Activate Compassion initiative, and carried out various charitable acts, among others, each of which in particular stands out as a highlight. As the academic support unit for this lecture, the Institute for Religious Studies and Cultural Communication at Communication University of China was established in 2010. This institute mainly conducts research on religions such as Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, and the Bahai faith. Its primary work, in general, primarily focuses on both teaching and academic research. It strives to plan, create, and develop related cultural products and promote religious studies discipline at Communication University. It also aims to advance and enrich religious culture. The Institute is also willing to strengthen academic exchanges with the academic, religious, and media communities, among others. It seeks to carry out project collaborations, enhance mutual understanding, and build strong connections. Now, let us welcome Khenpo Sodargye to give us his teaching.
Distinguished and highly respected Director Du Hanfeng, honored and esteemed teachers, and all my dear fellow students, I am very honored to be here today at the Institute of Religious Studies at Communication University to have a deeply heartfelt and sincerely meaningful exchange here today with so many teachers and students. Of course, language is necessary for communication. So first, I would like to just briefly share with you all some of my personal views, perspectives, and a few suggestions. After that, I warmly welcome and sincerely encourage everyone to provide me with any form of guidance, share your teachings, offer constructive criticism, engage in thoughtful debate, or ask questions, and so forth. We have all entered the 21st century, and in this era, many ideas are different from those of traditional times. Because in the past, whether it was transportation, information, or other aspects, between people, between nations, between countries, was quite closed off. But now, here in the 21st century, we are in an era of information overload, an era of explosion. At this time, what we hear and see is far, far more than before. In such an era, the problems we may potentially face are also increasing more and more. Perhaps the pain we experience is also increasing. So in this situation, we need some challenges we need some remedies. Under these circumstances, interaction, mutual trust, and learning from each other between people, these are indispensable. Therefore, no matter what the circumstances or conditions are in any situation, regardless of what may happen, I really truly enjoy from the bottom of my heart communicating and learning together with everyone. Today, in our scheduled lecture session, we will be focusing primarily on a topic that is both fundamental and thought-provoking: the differences between knowledge and culture. During this lecture, we will explore what distinguishes knowledge from culture, the differences between knowledge and culture. In reality, for me personally, this is also something that I have genuinely and deeply reflected on. However, after coming to Beijing from a place 0 meters high these past few days, I'm having oxygen intoxication, a feeling of altitude reaction. Perhaps many of the questions I have pondered may not be easily expressed verbally. In any case, I think that everyone here, without exception, can take a moment to reflect together and consider things thoughtfully. Usually, people in general often believe that someone is actually quite wise. This person is very knowledgeable. This person is truly cultured, an intellectual, and so on. We see and hear these kinds of terms quite often. But at this point, many people feel that perhaps culture and knowledge are, to some extent, essentially the same thing, at least in many ways. In some sense, there may be differences. From my understanding, so-called culture is actually something that carries a kind of comprehensive historical process accumulated through tradition. In other words, our national culture, religious culture, and the entire traditional culture, and so on, all of these are extremely valuable and have been continuously and carefully passed down through history. Some aspects of culture exist within our very blood. Some aspects of culture are present in every facet of our daily lives. Some aspects of culture may be reflected in the way we dress. So I think culture has a certain historical quality. Of course, there are some opinions in the world that may not fully align with the true meaning of culture. For example, we often say something like, my parents are uneducated. But this phrasing in our everyday language, we might say, my parents have no education. Like my own parents, they can't read or write. They don't know Tibetan. They don't know Chinese. They can't read anything at all. I also often say to others that my parents are uneducated. But in reality, they are cultured. Why do I say this? Because you can see many aspects of Tibetan culture embodied in them. Their entire tradition, for example, can be seen in the way they dress. Tibetan clothing culture has essentially never changed. In terms of language, the culture of the Tibetan language has also remained unchanged. In their habits, there are elements of Buddhist faith and culture that have always been preserved. But we might think that having no culture means having no knowledge, in other words, being illiterate. But actually, sometimes our understanding, as you might realize, is not necessarily entirely complete. As for what we call knowledge, everyone now knows that it is a kind of, in Tibetan, the knowledge that simply needs to be understood is called shesha. Shisha in Tibetan means knowledge. In the Tibetan language, it is called shisha. What does shisha mean? It refers to the knowledge or things that are understood. These are called knowledge. In this sense, there is scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, historical knowledge, religious knowledge, humanistic knowledge, and even media knowledge nowadays, and so on. A person may have indeed learned a great deal of knowledge, but someone who possesses knowledge does not necessarily have culture, while on the other hand, someone with culture will definitely possess at least some degree of knowledge. Nowadays, people consider certain individuals to be intellectuals. These intellectuals may often be found in schools, studying at university, in graduate programs, as all of these subjects have been successfully completed, but whether or not they are really truly cultured people is hard to say. Perhaps in terms of modern knowledge, he is highly well-read and erudite, and his knowledge should be quite extensive. But when it comes to truly understanding his own, for example, if he is Han Chinese, the traditional culture and civilization of the Han people that has spanned 4,000 or 5,000 years, do many of these so-called intellectuals today actually possess it? Not only do they not have it, but in fact, some of them, they don't even truly understand it at all. In fact, our culture is present in our daily lives. It may sometimes manifest differently in various places. Just now, on my way here in the car, they served me poor tea and poured me a cup. Regarding the custom of pouring tea, the folk customs of Tibetan culture and Han culture might differ somewhat in this regard. Full tea deceives, full wine respect. In other words, if you fill the teacup to the brim, it means you are slighting the person as a sign of disrespect. But if you fill a wine glass to the brim, it shows respect for the other party. Among the Han people, many who are knowledgeable about traditional culture all know this. But in Tibetan culture, there is a saying, if the tea isn't full, the heart isn't full. The tea must be poured to the brim of the bowl. If you don't fill it up, the heart is still unsatisfied. So when you serve tea to a guest, you should try to fill it to the top. Otherwise, their heart will feel unsatisfied, as if their wish hasn't been fulfilled. There is this kind of belief. So there are different interpretations in different cultures, but both of these are valuable. In fact, many proverbs, poems, or love songs from the ancients, including those among the Tibetans, such as Sangyang Gyatso, who composed a renowned love poem. On the surface, it appears to be a romantic love story, including songs using his experiences as their theme. But in reality, they contain elements of the traditional Tibetan way of life, and at the same time, many Buddhist ideas. And if you interpret them on a deeper level, there are some very profound Buddhist teachings embedded within, which generally cannot be openly disclosed in Buddhism. At times like this, I think, what is it that many people really need nowadays? Of course, we also need knowledge, because in this modern day and age, if you happen to be lacking in knowledge, not just Chinese knowledge, but I would say you need to understand a lot of international knowledge as well. If you don't, since we are now in an era of multiculturalism, with all kinds of information in the world, if you don't have an understanding, I'm afraid it would be very hard to get by in this world. It's something we really need. But what is it that we need to value even more? It's our own traditions and culture that we truly ought to have. In fact, some knowledge has just become fragmented bits of information. It hasn't yet become a truly integrated culture, at least not as a whole. These pieces of knowledge in our era and throughout the long course of human history may never actually develop into a culture. I've noticed that what people are especially fond of nowadays, including movies and television, many of you here are studying media, including journalism, film, and television, as well as animation. Many of you are involved in these fields. Are these considered knowledge? They are regarded as knowledge because they cater to different people and can attract their interests. They bring people direct or indirect happiness, comfort, or joy, and so on. For them, these things satisfy the senses and serve many, many purposes. But in the future, in 10 years, 20 years, or even 100 years from now, the things we are doing now, will they eventually become a true part of our national culture or news culture, or even truly genuine traditional culture? Whether they can truly become this kind of knowledge is very hard to say. Sometimes I think for many young people here, what is your main focus? When studying at school, you also have a great reverence for knowledge, but as for culture, perhaps it was abandoned a long time ago. Among the aspects of culture abandoned, perhaps some are indeed truly valuable, and perhaps in reality some are not, because as times change, it's possible that these cultural elements are no longer useful today. if they are of no use to humanity, if they serve no purpose for the world as a whole, then I think there's nothing wrong with discarding such culture. It can be abandoned. But if its value is truly significant and meaningful in our lives, it is indeed a truly very meaningful word in our lives for each of us, then we should do everything we can not to abandon such valuable culture and traditions from our ancestors. Therefore, I think that throughout history, all kinds of events have taken place in human society, including during the Cultural Revolution itself. I often think about this because it may have affected many of our traditional forms of knowledge, customs, ideas, rituals, and so on, and destroyed many lines of heritage. But for our future generations as a whole, this may be a loss. Of course, it is now widely recognized as a disaster. So at this time, we need to inherit or restore our original traditions. No matter what ethnicity you are, or which country you come from, or what family you belong to, everyone has a sense of responsibility. When we come into this world, perhaps much of our culture has already been lost for generations, and the heritage has long been broken. By the time we come into this world, it is already gone. Some aspects of culture may indeed very well be lost in the hands of our generation.
I often talk with some Tibetan students, teachers, and friends because many of the good ideas and traditions inherent to Tibetan regions, nowadays, many young people are influenced by Western culture. They keep giving them up. They really like certain things from the West, such as TV and Korean movies, various North Korean fashions, as well as beauty and cosmetic surgery. These are things that many young people especially yearn for. Perhaps it's normal that the hobbies and interests of young people differ from those of the elderly. But sometimes, what is it that they have been desperately chasing after for so many years? It's always some new kind of knowledge, new kind of pleasure, or new kind of trend. But behind all this, what we ourselves possess, the heritage passed down from our ancestors, those precious family heirlooms, may have already been abandoned or lost in our own hands. At such times will we become the sinners of history. We should take the time to thoughtfully reflect on ourselves, or in other words, look inward and examine our own thoughts and feelings. At such times, each of us will have different feelings and emotions. I think that everyone here would probably agree that in reality we are certainly not lacking in knowledge, but rather what we are truly lacking is culture. That's my perspective. Because some people are extremely proficient in modern things, whether it's language or writing, including current computer software, etc. These knowledge are very proficient. Not long ago, I heard some interesting news when I was getting off a plane at the busy airport just after landing. A few women, possibly because someone stepped on another's foot, started arguing. At first, they argued in Chinese at first. Then they switched to English. They were all extremely knowledgeable and well-informed. After that, they argued in French and in Japanese. Both sides were extremely proficient in various languages. First Chinese, then English, French, and Japanese. They reportedly also used Spanish, but whether they spoke Spanish, I'm not sure. It was 4 languages. Then the argument got heated. It went on from the very moment they first stepped off the plane, continuing all the way to the exit. The staff managed to persuade them to stop. They kept arguing fiercely, not caring at all about the large crowd watching them. When we analyze this, do they have knowledge? They probably do. Otherwise, being fluent in so many languages is not easy at all. But do they have cultural refinement? Do they have moral character? It's hard to say. Generally speaking, if nothing major happens, people who are cultivated, wise, and truly moral would not, in such a public place with so many people, affect the emotions of others or disrupt the normal order for many people. Usually, people with good manners would not be so petty in such situations. So sometimes when we look at many people nowadays, as I mentioned some time ago, most people probably do actually suffer from head-down syndrome. They're looking at their phones all day long, whether they're on a train, on a plane, or just walking down the street. Whenever they have a moment, they're glued to their phones. But do we really gain any culture from our phones, or do they truly bring us happiness? Not necessarily. Someone messages on WeChat, someone posts on Weibo, another person shares a short film, and someone else posts some kind of update. We talk, watch, and end up feeling exhausted. Yet we still feel that this is somehow the value of life. If we add it all up, the knowledge that is truly meaningful to our lives might not actually be found. The famous philosopher Nietzsche once wrote a book called Why I Am So Clever. In this book, he asks, why am I so clever? It's because I have never wasted my time on meaningless things. He understood what kinds of things are truly meaningful in life and what kinds of things are meaningless and just a waste of time. Things that bring no real meaning to oneself or to others. I think someone like Nietzsche would truly value his own time. When it's useful, he might study if necessary. If the knowledge isn't really useful, he might not even look at it. Nowadays, whether online or in bookstores, there are many books, but are there truly valuable ones that are genuinely worthwhile? There really should be, in fact. However, some of them are for commercial purposes or for all kinds of personal promotion. In order to capture people's attention, they'll say all kinds of various things and statements that resonate with our emotions. But what kind of benefit do these actually bring us? Maybe in the short term, it's just a kind of spiritual chicken soup. But ultimately, it might not have much real significance. I once read a book that said, when we read, we must use wisdom to discern and choose. If we don't use wisdom to make choices, maybe 50% of the books are meaningless for our lives. Even some bestsellers we may not discover until 10 years later. This book is meaningful to society and people's hearts. If it is meaningful at that point, then it's worth reading. Personally, I especially enjoy reading works by the great masters of the past, including the classics of Chan Buddhism, Vajrayana, and the masterpieces of various religious masters. For thousands or hundreds of years, their influence in human society has been enduring and not easily diminished. In Buddhist terms, this is called Vajra speech, or you could say their words carry direct, indirect, and suggestive meanings with multiple layers of significance. People at different levels can all gain benefits appropriate to their own level. We believe that such books are truly essential for understanding, including those in Buddhism. Many of you here today are very wise individuals, and now it is likely that you should study the 5 great treatises taught in Tibetan Buddhism. The 5 great treatises are Vinaya, Madhyamaka, Prajnaparamita, Pramana, and Abhidhamma. These are 5 systematic categories. According to the tradition of many monasteries in Tibetan Buddhism, it takes 16 or 17 years to study these 5 treatises. It's similar to today's philosophy departments, religious studies, or even journalism schools, and so on. It's such curriculum. If we keep studying such books on a regular basis, they will continuously and gently elevate and purify your mind. Therefore, when we read books, we must make careful choices. Otherwise, if we blindly place too much emphasis on knowledge, I sometimes have different opinions about the current education system. Because all the teachers and all the students focus on grades, including today, the college entrance exam day, perhaps many people place an extraordinary amount of importance on grades. If someone has high grades, they are considered 100% a good student. And if their grades aren't high, they are seen as 100% a bad person. Some think such a person has many flaws, but in reality, a person is not defined solely by their grades. According to Buddhism, we should look at the mind, what is called the Tathagatagarbha. Within the Tathagatagarbha, there are many treasures, and it can reveal countless treasures. In other words, a person's greatness can be discovered through their knowledge. And in terms of a person's character, even higher realms may be discovered. If we always think this way, I'm afraid it may not be very reasonable. I remember Germany last century. There was a teacher in Germany who placed great emphasis on students' grades. He didn't care about anything else, only about grades. In the graduation photo, everyone is standing together, smiling proudly as they celebrate this important milestone. There was one student with particularly outstanding grades, and the teacher placed him next to the principal and himself. Those with good grades were placed in the front row, then the second row and the third row. Those with particularly poor grades were put in the corners. As a result, there was a child who was placed in the most looked down upon spot in the corner. But he was extremely angry about this graduation photo. Later, a tremendous upheaval occurred in human history. It turned out that the student with especially poor grades was Hitler. And what triggered him? It was because he harbored deep resentment toward the person with excellent grades who stood next to the principal. He was extremely hateful, and that person was Jewish. Later, in Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, he also mentioned this, my hatred, my truly biggest angry heart. Actually, it was a classmate from our class who made me angry. From then on, he made a vow, I will exterminate the Jews. After he grew up, because his grades were particularly poor at the time, he himself was also in great pain, but later he worked extremely hard. Because of his hard work, Hitler's knowledge also gradually improved over time. His speeches were impressive. I've seen them, and although I don't understand German, from the translations I read, it was clear that this person was truly like a genius. If he had possessed true wisdom, it would have been truly remarkable. He began to study desperately and then launched the war. Later, the person who had particularly good grades also became a scientist. But the Jewish people led by him were exterminated as a result. This all happened within a single class. The teacher valued knowledge, but did not value culture. I think that in many of our schools today, we are still in an era that values knowledge above all else. Especially in many Eastern and Asian countries, this problem is quite prevalent. Sometimes teachers can also see this. Perhaps some students who have particularly good grades now will become very arrogant at a certain point. He thinks, I am really the best in our class. Their jealousy and arrogance keep growing. But when the time comes, they may not have a bright future. Meanwhile, some people feel inferior. The teacher also didn't pay attention to me, and my parents often criticized me. But in reality, they have a kind character and are very good at dealing with people. People like this may actually have a very promising future. So in some respects, we might need to have a more comprehensive understanding when evaluating students. Because in some of our educational systems and curricula, people nowadays place particular emphasis on scores. They use scores as the sole standard to measure all aspects of a student or a person, and nothing else. Includes people I came in contact with, such as graduates, master's students, and doctoral students from various universities. They come to our place to become monks. At first, I was very happy. If they became monks, then in the future, perhaps my way of thinking is different from that of many of you. Some of you might think, oh, this person is highly qualified and could bring honor to our company, our enterprise, or our school. But my way of thinking is he's a doctoral student and postdoctoral fellow at a large school. Later, he will promote the Dharma, benefit sentient beings, and may accomplish great things. But after some time had passed, although his breadth of knowledge was indeed truly quite impressive, sometimes his character, his ability to handle pressure, his heart was very fragile. On top of that, he may have developed many bad habits since childhood, including very poor teamwork skills, poor interpersonal skills, and poor communication skills. Even a small issue would immediately make him feel dejected and utterly heartbroken. In the end, it seemed that many things just couldn't be accomplished. So sometimes we realize that so-called knowledge does indeed have certain differences from a culture of kindness. I think it was this year, in 2015, there was a case. I saw in the news that a student had achieved exceptionally good results. He got perfect scores in physics, chemistry, mathematics, and biology, 800 points or something like that. He was very confident and applied to various universities in the United States. But in the end, many U.S. universities, including Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, and Princeton, as well as MIT and several others, all rejected him. Later, when people looked into what happened, how exactly did the United States, in this case, reject him? What were they looking for? They wanted students who were genuine, who understood life, who had a sense of humanity. Those were the kinds of students they were willing to accept. From our traditional perspective and our way of thinking, if someone basically scores full marks in every aspect, many top universities would be fighting to admit this student. But what was the reason so many of these schools rejected him? I think a lot of people feel the same way. When I first heard this news, I also found it hard to accept. I thought, you can't say this person lacks morals. Maybe he's a genius and great in every area. Why schools? Maybe these schools are a bit foolish. Maybe they're overthinking things. But in reality, perhaps behind their decisions, there really is something about our attitude toward perfect scores. Einstein once said as well that students who ace school might not know how to live life and might not do well. He thinks it's usually 70 or 80 points based on 100 points. As long as you get above 70 or 80, that's normal. And such people will know how to live and how to learn. There's this kind of saying, I think that when we really come to understand both culture and knowledge as separate concepts and consider them individually, what I value most is our truly traditional and cherished culture. Within traditional culture, especially here, I very sincerely hope that everyone present from the bottom of my heart that within each of us, there is a sense of responsibility, a sense of mission. And what should this mission be in our lives? It should truly be to help others to make a difference. This is extremely important for everyone, especially for many of you here at the Communication University, both teachers and students. The guidance you provide for society as a whole and the focus you bring to social issues are extremely important. At this time, if our orientation is entirely about our own lives, about making money, about promoting ourselves, then such thinking, whether it's reflected in any product you create, or in the students you teach, or in the teaching materials you compile, these things, from a broader societal perspective, it is true that there is not necessarily a good role model. So I think for any important institution, it bears a significant responsibility. What kind of responsibility is that? It's responsible for guiding public opinion across society and for directing the attention of the entire society. This is very important. Sometimes, as a Buddhist, I feel that regarding some of the current media, including some media from the 70s and 80s of the last century, I have a strong opinion. Why? Because I see that in many movies, TV shows, and documentaries, there are so many people who know nothing at all about religion, yet they present religion as a kind of modern culture to promote. When they promote it as modern culture, they often have some situations. For example, someone in a family faces all kinds of difficulties. When they have no other options, they choose to become a monk or nun. Because of this, when we monastics walk down the street, when we monks appear in any public place, people always think that this person must have suffered a major setback in life or mentally and really had no other choice. Why is this the case? It's probably because a lot of media, including our movies and TV shows, I do understand that at that time, especially around the 70s and 80s of the last century, indeed our generation regarded so-called Buddhism, so-called Christianity, and other religions' teachings as superstition, as something only unsuccessful people would turn to. But in fact, in some other countries and cultures, perhaps this wasn't the case. When I went to the United States, I asked them what monastics were like in their movies and TV shows. They said that in a few of our movies, some directors and their perspectives do portray things differently. But for the most part, when it comes to the appearance of religious figures, they are portrayed as rather mysterious and enigmatic figures, often surrounded by an air of secrecy and shrouded in an aura that is difficult to fully comprehend, with a profound sense of sanctity and reverence that inspires awe and respect in those around them. They appear in such contexts. Therefore, sometimes I also hope, especially now in the 21st century, I hope that I'm not saying this to protect myself, nor just for the sake of few monks like us, nor am I saying that you can't make these kinds of movies in the future. That's not what I mean. But in this world, having an objective evaluation is very important. This is a responsible attitude. What is the true nature of Buddhism, after all? This is something we should also understand. I also admit that among Buddhists, there may indeed be some people who really do use the Buddha's robes or act in the name of Buddhism to deceive others or to make money. I do not deny that such a small number of people exist. They probably do. But they do not represent true Buddhism. Therefore, the direction of public opinion in a society, orientation of the media, or the purpose of publicity, the concept of the whole person, the understanding of truth, and the view on society, there are huge differences because of this. So whether as intellectuals or as scholars, when we handle, make use of, or evaluate anything, we should stand from a very fair and impartial position and comment on anything based on facts. This is very much in line with our objective principles. Therefore, as scientists, in fact, scientists have their own advantage. What is that advantage? It is that they do not speak from an emotional or faith-based perspective. They should try their best to stand on the side of facts, focusing on the matter rather than the person. This is extremely important. Therefore, I think, first of all, I hope that many of the media professionals or media practitioners present here today in the future, whether you are evaluating religion or traditional ethnic customs, as one of the 7 billion people living today on the planet Earth, you should do your best to stand on the path of fairness and justice. And you should not distort the facts or deliberately twist the actual truth. I think this is unreasonable. And secondly, as I mentioned earlier, and as you may recall, many of us, in fact, have the responsibility to inherit our own traditions, including the styles of our architecture, including our clothing styles, such as what we wear, and the way we use our language. I notice that nowadays, perhaps when it comes to Chinese, the Chinese language, because China is a large nation, the Han people form a large group. For now, it may not be impacted. But in the future, when English covers many of our languages, many people seem unable to use certain Chinese terms properly and instead use English for some parts. This is called a mixed language. In fact, mixed languages have a significant impact on a nation's language. So we need to, when I'm talking with some of my Tibetan friends, I often tell them that when they speak Tibetan, it's best to use only Tibetan and not to mix in Chinese or English. I often tell some of my Han friends that when you speak Chinese, try not to mix in too much English, Japanese, or French. Although it's great for us to be proficient in the languages of various ethnic groups and countries, we should still have our own unique style. When it comes to clothing, we've basically really become westernized now. The traditional attire from the Tang Dynasty era has basically disappeared in the Han regions. Nowadays, people think that wearing a suit is very fashionable. In reality, we've already altered our own culture. We've mainly been learning from America and influenced by them. Actually, from a visual perspective, wearing a suit looks very formal, neat, and nice. Some time ago at my school, for each teacher, Tibetan teachers wore Tibetan clothing and Han teachers wore Han-style suits. After putting on a suit, people who didn't look very good before suddenly looked especially good in a suit. I said, "You've changed. You look so good now." Sometimes what you wear can really make a big difference for a person. When someone is well-dressed, of course, for those who are already good-looking, that's another story. Even people who aren't very good-looking suddenly become quite attractive. Now, I think Western culture really encompasses a lot, including Western clothing culture, which has spread all over the world. You could say that basically everything has already become westernized. Nowadays, many Tibetan friends who used to wear traditional Tibetan clothing, today many people wear Han clothing. Actually, authentic Han clothing dates back to the Tang Dynasty back then. Han clothing looked like that. Later on, it gradually changed, and now many Tibetans also wear Western suits. Even some Rinpoches in Tibetan Buddhism wear Western suits. In Chinese Buddhism, I haven't seen that yet, but in the future, it's possible that some monks will gradually start wearing suits as well. So what am I really talking about today? Ultimately, each of us should truly have a sense of responsibility. This responsibility needs to be examined with wisdom. Right now, when it comes to our own culture, including language, certain products, and even our everyday way of life and so on, there are many things that perhaps we need to persist in, because only by persisting can we achieve truly good results. All the teachers and students present here, sometimes you can pay attention to your own life. You have to, after all. But what's even more important is to care about society, to care about humanity as a whole. If we look at it from some Buddhist perspectives, we should care about both our present life and our future lives, because the cycle of rebirth is extremely long. We should also care of concern, because cause and effect never fails. If you don't acknowledge this, or you don't have such beliefs, that's also fine. But what is essential is we are all members of humanity. We should do our best to absorb good culture and good knowledge. As for bad culture and bad knowledge, they may not be that important. Therefore, we should use our own wisdom and our own hearts to observe, because if we lack the wisdom to discern, the world today is truly dazzling, filled with an overwhelming array of choices. Sometimes, as we live in this world, it's really hard to say what kind of people we should choose to associate with. It's also hard to say what kind of knowledge to pursue, what kind of books to read, what kind of job or career path to choose for yourself, or even what kind of partner or companion to have in your life, and so on. You may also encounter many awkward situations, or times when you simply can't really make a choice. At such times, our wisdom plays a very important role. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a saying that goes, if you possess wisdom, you should make full use of your own wisdom. If you lack wisdom, you should seek advice from those who are wise. By doing so, you can dispel the fog of confusion you have about certain matters, easy to clear away. So whether it's the pursuit of knowledge or the inheritance of culture, each of us actually bears a certain responsibility in this world. But if we don't take on this responsibility now, life is impermanent and short. Decades pass by in the blink of an eye. Some opportunities may never come again. So when such an opportunity arises, in fact, it's something that everyone should strive for right now. Truly wise people, knowledgeable people, and cultured people are still different from the others. What we need even more is knowledge is important, but even more important is the inheritance of culture and the improvement of personal cultivation. This is extremely important. Speaking just from my own perspective, sometimes I like studying and reading books, but that is knowledge. It might not solve the problem of life and death for me, and it may not necessarily resolve my ultimate issue of liberation. So sometimes I really think, no matter how tired I am or whatever the situation is, I try my best to share some useful Buddhist knowledge as well as some worldly knowledge I have learned. In fact, this kind of exchange of knowledge is truly the most meaningful thing in life. All right, that's all I have to say.